Hi everyone, I wanted to take a minute and explain about the increases and resetting of the stitch markers in this shawl pattern. When I knit shawls, I like to use stitch markers to keep track of my increases. And on this particular shawl, you'll be making 4 increases on every right side row of the pattern. There's an increase at the beginning of each row, each right side row, and then you have an increase on either side of the center panel, and then you have an increase at the end of the rows. The stitch pattern that is used for each of the side panels is worked on a multiple of 3. So every time you have at least 3 stitches between your markers, you'll be resetting your markers. Every time you reset the markers, you'll be adding 2 repeats of the stitch pattern. When you're making your increases, the increase at the beginning of the row is always going to come right after your stitch marker here, this first one. And when you get to the increase on the right side of the center panel, you're always going to make the increase again after your first stitch marker. And then on the left side of the shawl, your increase is going to come right before your second stitch marker. And then same thing for the end of the row. You'll be making your increases right before the second stitch marker. In some cases, when you reset your markers, you'll have 4 stitches between each set of markers. Sometimes you'll only have the 3 stitches between your markers. When you need to reset your markers, this set of markers at the beginning of the row, we always, like I said, the pattern multiple is 3, so we're going to be moving the stitch markers 3 stitches. At the beginning of the row, you'll want to take this stitch marker and move it to the right 3 stitches. And this is why you'll want to use reclosable markers like this, so you can easily take them off and move them. I'm at the point where I will be moving over 3 stitches and I'll have 1 stitch left in between my markers. So I'm just going to take this off here and count over 1, 2, 3 stitches, and then place that back on. Now I have 1 stitch between my markers. Sometimes you will have 0 stitches, so the markers will be up against each other. And then when you get to the markers on the right side of your center panel, you want to take this first one and move it to the left 3 stitches. So take that off. Oops. Count over 1, 2, 3, and put them back on. For the set of markers on the left side of my center panel, I want to take this second marker and move it 3 stitches to the right. So he comes off. There's 1, 2, 3. Put them back on. And then my last set of markers at the end of the row here, we're going to take this first one off and move it 3 stitches to the left. So there's 1, 2, 3. Put them back on, and then I'm ready to continue working with my pattern. So I hope that helps explain how I'm using the stitch markers and how you reset them for your pattern. Now I want to show you how to do this beaded drop stitch bind off. So pretending that this is our shawl and we have the beads strung onto the yarn, we're ready to work the setup row for the bind off. And it's really simple. All you're going to do is knit a stitch, and then you want to have a bead right up there next to your needles, and you're going to make a double yarn over. And don't worry about where the bead is, it can be slid into place later. So double yarn over, knit a stitch, slide one bead up, double yarn over, knit a stitch, slide a bead up, and double yarn over. So that's all you do across the row. And last one. There we go. Then, now we are ready to actually start binding off our stitches. And all of these double yarn overs that we just made with our beads, we're going to be dropping those off of the needle. They're not going to be worked at all. And because they are independent stitches or independent loops on the needle, and they're not connected to any of the rows below, this won't unravel. The yarn overs are just going to be dropped, and they're just going to hang there with the beads on them. So what you want to do, you just knit the first stitch, and here we have our double yarn over with the bead. We're just going to push it off the needle. It's just going to be hanging there like this. Don't worry, that will look better as you continue to bind off. And now I have my next stitch. I'm going to knit that, and then you just pass it over like a normal bind off. So here's another double yarn over. Off he goes. I'll knit my next stitch, pass it over, and again, don't worry about where the beads are at this point, because you can slide those up the yarn so that they're hanging correctly when you're all done binding off. You could do Jenny's surprisingly stretchy bind off. That will work on this as well, although it is a little extra tricky because of the dropped stitches and the beads, which is the bind off that I used actually. So here's our last double yarn over and our last stitch. And then of course you would cut your tail and pull it through, weave in the ends. But here is the bind off. And this bead here is not hanging on the strands, so I'm just going to give him a little push and slide him up. And this stitch also is out of place. So you just fix any stitches that aren't where you want them, or fix any beads that aren't where you want them to be. And then there you go. There is your beaded drop stitch, bind off.